Star Trek: The Springfield Directive, The Simpsons crosses over with Star Trek: The Next Generation, written by ChatGPT with some minor tweaks and editing. Springfield was enjoying what passed for a normal day. The sun shone over Moe's Tavern, the Quickie Mart had a fresh supply of slightly expired hot dogs, and the nuclear power plant rumbled along in blissful ignorance of the laws of safety. At the plant's control room, Homer Simpson was deeply engaged in an activity he had mastered: napping. A half-eaten donut rested comfortably on his belly as his computer monitor flashed a bright red warning. Anomaly detected. The screen blinked furiously, accompanied by an alarm that went entirely ignored. Across the room, Lenny and Carl stood at the window, watching in dull fascination as a glowing purple rift began to widen in the sky above Springfield. Lenny, you seeing this?" Carl asked, scratching his head. "Yeah, but if we don't acknowledge it, maybe it won't become our problem," Lenny replied hopefully. The entire room shuddered as the alarm doubled in volume. Still, Homer snored undisturbed. Suddenly, the door burst open, and Professor Frink came skidding in, flailing his arms like a malfunctioning windmill. "Oh, we've broken physics again! This is why I keep saying we shouldn't press random buttons," Frink wailed. Lenny frowned. "Okay, yeah, it's officially our problem." Frink leaped at a control panel, flipping switches and adjusting dials at a frantic pace. This rift, this quantum space-time ripperoo, is attracting foreign objects into our dimension. We could be dragging in entire civilizations. Another deep whoosh echoed through the plant, rattling the walls. At long last, the noise stirred Homer. He blinked groggily. "Ugh, if this is another fire drill, I vote we just let the fire win this time." Carl and Lenny silently pointed out the window. Homer turned to look and promptly screamed. Hovering above Springfield, emerging from the glowing rift like an overgrown frisbee of doom, was the USS Enterprise D. The familiar jingle of Channel 6 News played, and the screen flickered to life, revealing Kent Brockman sitting at his desk with his usual air of smug professionalism. His hair was perfectly coiffed, his tie neatly knotted, and his expression remained eerily calm despite the chaos unfolding outside. "Good evening, Springfield," he announced smoothly, folding his hands in front of him. "We are under alien occupation." Behind him, the newsroom window showed a massive starship hovering over the town, casting a shadow that swallowed entire city blocks. For a moment, Kent paused, adjusting his papers as though he had just reported a mild traffic delay rather than a potential planetary invasion. "Now, before you all panic, and I do encourage a moderate level of panic, I'd like to remind our viewers that, as of yet, no laser disintegrations have been reported. However, should that change, Channel 6 will be the first to sensationalize it for your viewing pleasure." The camera cut to footage of Springfield citizens reacting in true Springfield fashion, some running in circles screaming, others attempting to sell alien-themed merchandise, and, in the case of Mayor Quimby, preparing a special tax for extraterrestrial visitors. In related news, Brockman continued, the price of tin foil has skyrocketed as local conspiracy theorists scramble to reinforce their hats. More updates as this story develops. As the sight of the massive Starfleet vessel loomed overhead, Springfield citizens did what they did best: turn a confusing and potentially historic event into a mix of opportunism, paranoia, and biting sarcasm. Standing on the steps of City Hall, Mayor Quimby adjusted his tie and leaned into a microphone, ever the politician eager to capitalize on any situation. He turned to his aides, whispering out of the corner of his mouth, "Gentlemen, I want a full proposal on my desk by noon. We are drafting a Starfleet taxation initiative, docking fees, atmospheric disruption fines, and an intergalactic tourism tax. If those pointy-eared bureaucrats think they can hover over my city for free, they've got another thing coming." His aides furiously scribbled down notes, though one of them hesitated. "Sir, does the Federation even use money?" Quimby scoffed. "If they're in space, they can afford it." Outside the android's dungeon, Comic Book Guy stood with his arms crossed, surveying the spectacle with the exasperation of a man who had spent his entire life waiting for aliens, only to be underwhelmed. He sighed. Oh, the Enterprise D, also known as Starfleet's first cruise liner. Nothing says boldly going where no one has gone before, like bringing your children into deep space peril. A small group of fellow nerds nodded in solemn agreement, while Milhouse, holding a Star Trek action figure, looked conflicted. But isn't it cool, though? Milhouse asked. Comic book guy sighed. It would have been had they used the Sovereign-class ship, but nah, we get this. A flying hotel with diplomatic conferences instead of phaser battles. Pathetic. He shook his head in disdain before retreating into his store, undoubtedly to begin pricing Starfleet merchandise at outrageous rates. At the Quickie Mart, Apu wasted no time capitalizing on the event. A hastily made sign reading, "Welcome Space Travelers," now hung above the entrance, and the price of every item inside had been quietly adjusted, marked up 300%. "My friends," he greeted a confused group of customers. "In honor of our esteemed cosmic visitors, I have introduced limited edition intergalactic pricing. Do not be shy. If you can afford a spaceship, surely a $25 bottle of soda is within your reach." Jimbo Jones scowled. "Dude, that's highway robbery." Apu placed a hand over his heart. "Ah, my dear friend, I assure you, I am merely embracing the spirit of capitalism, just as the great Ferengi would have wanted." Meanwhile, across town, Chief Wiggum stood beside his police cruiser. He turned to his officers, Lou and Eddie, who stood watching him with expressions of mild confusion. "Boys," Wiggum said, "I don't trust things I can't arrest." Lou blinked. Chief, I don't think you can arrest a spaceship." Wiggum frowned. "Oh, yeah? What if it's loitering, huh?" Eddie nodded slowly. "That actually kind of checks out." Wiggum smirked. "Exactly. All right, let's roll out. I want to get at least one alien in cuffs before lunch." Lou and Eddie exchanged uncertain looks before shrugging and following their chief because, well, Springfield law enforcement had never exactly been by the book. Springfield had faced plenty of strange occurrences before, but a visit from Starfleet? That was just another Tuesday. "Captain," Worf rumbled, his tactical display flashing red, "we have been pulled into a subspace anomaly. Our sensors indicate an unknown planetary civilization directly below us." Captain Jean-Luc Picard exhaled slowly. It had been a long day already, filled with diplomatic pleasantries and Data's latest philosophical musings on humor. He did not have the patience for this. "Mr. LaForge?" Picard pressed his communicator. "Report." Geordi's voice crackled through the comm. "Captain, the anomaly is affecting our systems. Our warp field is destabilized, and we appear to be caught in the planet's gravity well. We're stuck." Commander Riker leaned against the console, surveying the planet below. "Well, that's new." Data's fingers danced over his controls. "Sir, I am detecting anomalous life signs from the planet's surface." "Potential hostiles?" Worf asked, his hand instinctively resting near his phaser. Data paused. "Define hostile." Picard sighed. "Open hailing frequencies." The screen blinked to life, revealing Mayor Quimby seated behind his desk. He grinned into the camera, adjusting his tie. Behind him, a framed "Re-elect Quimby" poster was prominently displayed. "Ah, greetings, mysterious space travelers. I, welcome you to Springfield, a thriving metropolis built on integrity, hard work, and totally legal raffles and contests." Picard's expression did not change, though his patience visibly thinned. "I am Captain Jean-Luc Picard of the United Federation of Planets. We seem to have been unexpectedly transported to your location." Quimby nodded enthusiastically. "Ah, yes, yes, and I, as elected representative of this fine city, would love to discuss a mutual agreement of trade and taxation." Riker blinked. "Taxation?" Quimby chuckled. "Oh, just a small, standard intergalactic docking fee. Purely a formality, you understand." Picard's jaw tightened. "I believe we will decline your generous offer." At the nuclear power plant, Frink frantically adjusted controls, sweat beading on his forehead. "Oh, this is bad. This is worse than bad. This is bad squared." Lenny cleared his throat. "So, how do we fix it?" Frink waved his arms dramatically. "Ah, Theoretically, if we stabilize the quantum frequencies, we can reverse the polarity. Oh, who am I kidding? I have no idea. Homer, munching on a donut, yawned. I'd help, but I already promised my couch I'd spend quality time with it. Frink spun back to his console, frantically flipping switches and muttering equations under his breath. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he worked. Homer, meanwhile, lazily scanned the control panel until his eyes locked onto a big, flashing red button labeled, "Do not press." His pupils dilated. Ooh! Frink turned just in time to see Homer reaching for it. No, no, that button is not for... Click. Homer grinned as he slammed his palm down. The entire room flashed white. Uh-oh, Homer muttered. A blinding vortex of energy erupted from behind him, and in an instant, Homer was pulled upward, vanishing into thin air. The transporter pad shimmered. A hazy blue light materialized into Homer Simpson, who stood there blinking in confusion. He surveyed the high-tech surroundings, his face scrunching in thought. What? Free samples? Oh, this must be one of them fancy cruise ships. Standing nearby, Worf instinctively tensed, glaring at the strange, soft-bodied intruder. Captain Picard slowly turned to face him, looking absolutely exhausted. He pinched the bridge of his nose and sighed deeply. Oh no! Homer stood on the transporter pad, rubbing his eyes and blinking against the bright lights of the sleek, futuristic room. The last thing he remembered was pressing a button at the power plant, and now he was here, wherever here was. Before him, a towering Klingon warrior with a deep scowl and folded arms glared at him as if he were an enemy combatant. Captain Picard, Commander Riker, and Lieutenant Commander Data entered, all staring at the strange new arrival with varying degrees of confusion and concern. Homer stretched and yawned. Comfy. Do you guys do room service? Or should I? Picard let out a sigh, already sensing this was going to be a headache. He pinched the bridge of his nose before addressing his security officer. Mr. Worf, what is this? Worf's jaw tightened. It appears to be a life form. Data tilted his head, his yellow eyes flickering with curiosity. Intriguing. His molecular density suggests a life form that has somehow survived on a nearly exclusive diet of fried dough and fermented liquids. Homer puffed out his chest proudly. And yet somehow I remain a perfect specimen of human excellence. Picard was unimpressed. Who are you? Homer Simpson, pro-level napper and safety inspector at Springfield Nuclear. Oh no, wait, I'm on vacation, Homer said, suddenly realizing. Sweet. Riker folded his arms. How did he get on board? Homer scratched his head, thinking for a moment. I don't know. I saw a big blinky button. I pressed it, and now I'm here. Honestly, that's how most of my days start. Picard turned to Data. Is there any way to send him back immediately? Data nodded. I will attempt to recalibrate the transporter. Homer's eyes lit up. Ooh, does that mean I get superpowers? Picard, now beyond exhausted, responded flatly. No. Homer pouted. Aw, nuts. Marge stood at the front door, her hands on her hips, frowning at the empty space where Homer should have been. Beside her, Lisa and Bart exchanged nervous glances. Where is he? He never misses dinner. Unless there's a chili cook-off, a half-price donut sale, or... Marge sighed. Oh, I just answered my own question. Lisa bit her lip. Mom, I think this might be a little bigger than that. Bart grinned. Or maybe Dad finally got abducted by aliens. I knew I should have charged them for the privilege. Marge shot him a look. Bart shrugged. What? If aliens are studying bad habits, Dad's basically their perfect test subject. It didn't take long for Springfield to do what Springfield did best. Panic. Rumors spread like wildfire. Aliens had taken Homer, and the town reacted exactly as one might expect. In the town square, Grandpa Simpson had already found himself a soapbox, wildly gesturing to a crowd. I told you this day would come. Back in '42, the aliens tried to recruit me for their galactic bowling league, but I said, no, I'm a man of Earth. And what did they do? They beamed me up, did some weird tests, and then abandoned me at a Denny's at 3 a.m. And to make it worse, they were out of pancakes. A confused townsperson squinted at him. Wait, what does this have to do with anything? Grandpa nodded knowingly. Exactly. They say it's all fun and games until the aliens land. Then bam, cows gone, people disappearing, and suddenly my social security check is 3 days late. The crowd gasped. Panic ensued. Moe was selling UFO repellent, which was just dish soap with a handwritten label. Chief Wiggum had set up roadblocks for no apparent reason. Mr. Burns, always the opportunist, was demanding to speak with the space captain to cut a nuclear deal. Meanwhile, Kent Brockman addressed the town with his usual sense of overdramatic flair. Good evening. Reports are coming in that a local bald man, possibly unemployed, has been abducted by space travelers. Is Earth doomed? The answer, probably. Picard and his crew watched the Springfield madness unfold on the main view screen. Picard massaged his temples. I have negotiated with Romulans, outwitted the Borg, and now I'm dealing with this. Riker, arms crossed, nodded in agreement. Yep, that's about what I expected. Worf narrowed his eyes. They seemed remarkably unfazed by first contact. Data analyzed the footage. Intriguing. Statistically, most human societies would react with shock or awe when encountering a superior alien species. Riker smirked. Yeah, well, I think these people are used to weird things happening. Meanwhile, Homer had taken an interest in the screen. He leaned into Picard's chair, watching Springfield. Whoa, I've never seen Springfield this clear before. Did someone clean my eyes while I was asleep? Picard spun around. What are you doing here? Homer shrugged and pointed at the screen. I was hoping to watch something cool, but it's just a bunch of idiots panicking. Riker smirked. So, pretty much a normal day in Springfield? Homer nodded. Exactly. In the depths of engineering, Geordi LaForge and Data were hard at work recalibrating the transporter system to send Homer back where he belonged. All right, I think I can stabilize the signal enough to send him back, Geordi said, tapping at his console. Homer, meanwhile, had begun wandering around engineering, touching things he absolutely should not be touching. Hey, cool, what's this do? He asked, poking at a glowing panel. The ship immediately shook violently. Red alert sirens blared. Warp core breach imminent, the ship's computer droned. Geordi spun around in sheer panic. Homer, no! Homer winced. Oops! Geordi and Data scrambled to undo whatever catastrophe Homer had just triggered. Captain, we may have a problem. Data called over the comm. What is it now? Picard's voice came through, frustration barely contained. Geordi tapped at the console frantically. Homer just deactivated half of our power grid. Homer threw up his hands in self-defense. Hey, in my defense, why would you put a big shiny button if you didn't want people to press it? The ship shuddered again. Fix it, immediately. Picard's voice came through the comm with zero patience left. Geordi gritted his teeth, already regretting every decision that led him to this moment. He turned to Data. This right here is exactly why we don't let civilians in engineering. Red alert klaxons blared across the USS Enterprise as Geordi LaForge and Data frantically worked at their consoles, desperately trying to override the catastrophic damage Homer had caused by pressing random buttons. Sparks flew from one of the consoles, and warning messages flooded the displays. Meanwhile, Homer, oblivious to the danger, admired his reflection in a shiny panel. Geordi tapped his communicator. Captain, we've got a problem. Again. Picard's weary voice came through the comm. Let me guess. Homer? Geordi sighed. Yeah. Data, his expression neutral, added, he disabled half our power grid by accidentally reprogramming the warp core diagnostics into a karaoke machine. As if on cue, a robotic voice filled engineering, now playing Achy Breaky Heart by Billy Ray Cyrus. A MIDI version of the song began playing through the ship's comms. Homer grinned and started swaying to the tune. Oh, I like this one, he said, snapping his fingers. Geordi and Data exchanged exhausted glances before Data quickly shut off the music. Lovely, Picard muttered over the comm. Can you undo it? Geordi was already typing furiously. We're working on it, but the power surge is interfering with the transporter. We can't send Homer back until we stabilize the system. Homer scoffed. Pfft, you nerds always find a way to ruin my fun. Data turned to him, his voice as logical as ever. Your fun nearly damaged the ship. Homer grinned. Yeah, but only half of it. At the Springfield power plant, Lisa and Professor Frink worked in a makeshift lab, scanning the ever-growing rift in the sky. It flickered between colors, its pulse quickening like a heartbeat. Small objects, trash cans, squirrels, and a confused disco stew floated upward toward it, disappearing into the swirling energy. Lisa frowned. This isn't good. If the rift keeps expanding, it won't just trap the Enterprise here. It'll start fusing our reality with theirs. A trash can drifted into the rift. A moment later it reappeared, now shaped like a Starfleet shuttle. Lisa and Frink exchanged wide-eyed looks. Oh, it's worse than I thought, Frink yelped. The quantum polarity doohickey is rewriting reality. Lisa's brow furrowed. If we don't fix this soon, Springfield could become part of the Federation forever. A long beat, Lisa blinked. Actually, that doesn't sound that bad. Frink gasped. Oh, no, no, no. We'd be bound by strict intergalactic policies. No more freeform chaos, no more mob rule, no more... Lisa smirked. Less people getting hit by wrecking balls? Frink's eyes widened. Exactly. That's just not Springfield. Just then, a static-filled voice crackled over the lab's monitor. It was Picard, broadcasting from the Enterprise. To the individuals working on the anomaly, our sensors have detected your activity. Your attempts to contain the disturbance are noteworthy. We may have a serious problem. On the Enterprise's bridge, Picard sat in his command chair, his face grim as Lisa and Frink appeared on the view screen. Riker and Worf stood on either side of him, monitoring the situation. The anomaly is destabilizing faster than expected, Picard said. Our calculations suggest less than 2 hours before this reality permanently merges with ours. Lisa and Frink exchanged worried glances. Lisa leaned toward the screen. You're the captain, right? Can your ship stop it? Picard exhaled sharply. We're attempting to override the gravitational pull, but we're having difficulties. A loud crash came from somewhere off-screen. That was definitely already broken when I got here, Homer's voice called out. Picard clenched his jaw. Lisa sighed. Gravity? Physics? Common sense? None of those apply to him. Picard nodded. Unfortunately. To keep Homer occupied and out of further trouble, Riker had activated the holodeck and designed something truly special. Donut Land. Homer stepped into the simulation, eyes widening in awe. Everywhere he looked, the world was made of donuts. The clouds were powdered sugar, the trees were Boston cream, the rivers flowed with pink frosting. In the distance, jelly-filled mountains glistened under a golden glaze. Homer fell to his knees. It's beautiful. Data, standing beside him, observed with curiosity as Homer took a massive bite out of a waffle cone bridge. Fascinating, Data noted. The simulation's structural integrity is not designed for human consumption. Homer, his mouth full, replied, Then why does it taste so good? A giant pink glazed donut rolled by. Without hesitation, Homer took off after it, screaming with joy. Come back, I'm your biggest fan. Back on Earth, Springfield was in full hysteria. The mob had spiraled into complete madness. On his soapbox, Grandpa Simpson continued his rant. You know, back in my day, we didn't have no fancy starships. If a man wanted to explore space, he just ate a bad oyster and hallucinated. Moe grunted, shaking his head. Oh, great, another thing that's going to ruin business. First it was that health inspector. Now it's aliens. Suddenly the sky flickered. Buildings briefly morphed into futuristic Starfleet designs before reverting back to their old Springfield forms. Marge, horrified, screamed, Lisa! Fix this right now! Geordi, Data, and Picard arrived in engineering as the warp core pulsed erratically. The ship trembled under the strain. Captain, we're out of time, Geordi shouted. We need to close the rift now. Picard's expression remained firm. Can we do that while returning Homer? Geordi hesitated. Maybe, but it's risky. If we time it even a second off, Homer could be permanently stuck in subspace. A long silence. Picard turned to Worf. Thoughts? Worf, arms crossed, responded grimly. A small price to pay. Homer lay back on a giant sprinkle-covered raft, floating peacefully in a river of pink frosting. Suddenly, the simulation flickered and vanished. The walls of the holodeck reappeared, cold and metallic. Wait, where'd my donuts go? Homer stammered, looking around in panic. Riker stepped into the holodeck. Homer, we need to get you back home. Homer eyed him suspiciously. Will there be donuts on the way? Riker, completely sincere, shook his head. No. A long beat. Then, Homer screamed, then what's the rush? Homer paced back and forth on the transporter pad, arms swinging lazily as Riker, Worf, and Geordi worked feverishly at the console. Red warning lights blinked across the control panels, and the tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a batleth. Picard entered, his expression strained, his patience clearly running on reserve power. Mr. LaForge, Picard said, his voice tight, please tell me you're ready to send Mr. Simpson home. Geordi wiped his brow. We're almost there, Captain, but the rift is still unstable. If we don't time this exactly right, we risk... Homer snapped his fingers. Let me guess. Blah, blah, subspace anomalies. Yada, yada. Big boom. I get it. Picard's stern expression did not falter. Mr. Simpson, if this isn't done properly, you could be permanently displaced into an unknown dimension. Homer tilted his head. Will there be food in this unknown dimension? Data, analyzing the question with characteristic precision, replied, that is entirely dependent on the physical laws of the reality you would enter. Homer grinned. I'll take my chances. Lisa and Professor Frink frantically worked at a makeshift console, fingers flying across the keys as the rift above the power plant pulsed dangerously. The sky rippled like disturbed water, pulling in objects at random. Apu's Quickie Mart momentarily flickered, transforming into a sleek Starfleet replicator station before snapping back into its usual fluorescent-lit glory. Nearby, Marge held Maggie close, her brow furrowed with concern. The baby remained completely unfazed, calmly sucking on her pacifier. Bart, however, saw an opportunity and was already selling I Survived the Space Rift t-shirts to a group of bystanders. Lisa, I don't want to rush you, Marge said, gripping Maggie tightly, but maybe fix this a little faster. Lisa didn't look up from her frantic calculations. Mom, science doesn't work that way. Bart smirked. I don't know, Lisa. According to every mad scientist ever, it's just one conveniently timed lightning bolt away. Right on cue, a massive energy surge erupted from the rift, sending a shockwave through the ground. The crowd screamed and scattered. Grandpa Simpson pointed wildly at the sky. I knew it. The aliens are here to steal our shoes. Lisa gritted her teeth. That is not even remotely how science works. The Enterprise shuddered violently, its structure groaning under the stress of the gravitational forces pulling at it. Picard gripped the arms of his chair, knuckles white, as Riker and Worf worked feverishly at their stations. Captain, the rift is reaching critical mass, Riker shouted. We have to shut it down now. Mr. LaForge, Picard called over the comm. Geordi's voice crackled through the speaker. We're ready, Captain. Homer is prepped for transport. Homer stood on the transporter pad, looking increasingly impatient. Can we hurry this up? I was supposed to fall asleep on the couch an hour ago. Geordi exchanged a glance with Riker. Energizing now. Homer started to shimmer, but instead of disappearing, he glowed bright pink. The transporter console overloaded, sending sparks flying as the ship shook violently. Geordi's eyes widened. Oh no! Over the comm, Data's voice came through, calm but urgent. Captain, I believe the rift is interfering with the transport sequence. Instead of returning Homer to Springfield, it is creating an unstable time loop. Homer snapped his fingers. Oh, like that one episode of that Sci-Fi show where the guy keeps reliving the same day? Picard's voice was as flat as a deflector shield. Yes, Mr. Simpson, exactly like that. Lisa's eyes flicked between the readouts on her console and the sky above. The rift had reached its maximum instability. The entire atmosphere twisted and warped, flickering between dimensions. I think we have one last shot at fixing this, Lisa called. Marge clutched Maggie tighter. Sweetie, whatever it takes to get your father back on the couch. Just do it. Picard braced himself as the ship shuddered again. Captain, Worf shouted, the rift is at 98% collapse. Geordi, Data, now or never, Picard ordered. Geordi's fingers flew across the controls as Data and Riker recalibrated the transporter sequence. Homer, still glowing, suddenly started levitating slightly. Hey, I can fly, he grinned. No, you can't, Geordi snapped. That's the rift trying to absorb you. Homer nodded sagely. Still counts. A final pulse of energy surged through the room. Homer glowed even brighter, and then the transporter activated. Lisa slammed the final override sequence on her keyboard, while Frink yanked down a massive lever. The rift collapsed inward with a deafening whoosh. A bright flash of light filled the sky. And then Homer reappeared, landing flat on his back with an oof. A moment of stunned silence. The townspeople gathered around, staring. Bart grinned. Dad's back! Marge rushed over, hugging Homer tightly. Homer, are you okay? Homer blinked up at her. I smell steak sauce. Marge sighed in relief. The sky above was clear, the rift was gone, and the Enterprise had stopped flickering. Lisa checked her readings, her lips curling into a small smile. We did it! Frink pumped his fists. Oh, yes, we prevented catastrophic reality failure. Also, we got rid of that odd side effect where random squirrels were learning to recite Shakespeare. Nearby, a squirrel perched on a crate. To hoard or not to hoard? That is the question, it declared. Everyone stared. The squirrel shrugged and scurried away. Picard sat back in his chair, watching the now vanished rift on the view screen. The Enterprise was stable once more. Riker exhaled, shaking his head with a grin. We actually pulled it off. Picard nodded. Indeed, number one. Let's make sure it never happens again. Later that night, Homer was back where he belonged, on the couch watching TV as if nothing had happened. Marge busied herself in the kitchen while Lisa sat beside him, arms crossed. Dad, you almost destroyed reality, Lisa said. Homer smirked. Yeah, but only for a little while. A beat of silence. So, when's the next one? He asked with a grin. Lisa groaned and face-palmed. The sun rose over Springfield, bathing the town in its usual warm glow. The flickering between realities had ceased, and things had settled back into their regular level of controlled chaos. Inside the Simpson house, however, one thing remained constant. Homer was still asleep on the couch, snoring loudly. Marge entered, hands on her hips, her expression a mix of frustration and relief. Homer, you were gone for almost an entire day. Do you have any idea how worried we were? Homer grumbled from under a pile of snack wrappers. 5 more minutes. Marge sighed and turned toward Lisa, who was seated at the kitchen table, scrolling through a Starfleet pad that had been left behind. She smirked. Mom, I think Dad's going to be just fine. He barely remembers what happened. Marge exhaled, taking a seat beside her. Lisa, honey, I love your father, but I still don't understand how he managed to cause a space-time crisis. Lisa shrugged. Neither does Starfleet. Data sent me a message saying that scientifically, it shouldn't have been possible, but somehow Dad managed to warp probability itself. Both mother and daughter glanced at Homer, who had now rolled off the couch and onto the floor, but remained blissfully asleep. Marge deadpanned. Yup. That tracks. The town of Springfield bustled as it recovered from the strange events of the previous day. Remnants of the chaos were still visible. Half-finished Welcome Aliens banners, strange scorch marks from misplaced phaser blasts, and at least one cow that had somehow learned Klingon. On Channel 6, Kent Brockman delivered his latest report. And in other news, all traces of the so-called galactic anomaly have disappeared, allowing us to resume our proud tradition of ignoring basic science. Moe, unfazed by the town's return to normalcy, continued selling bottles of his anti-alien spray, which was just dish soap with a different label. Outside the android's dungeon, comic book guy stood with arms crossed, shaking his head. A Star Trek crossover with The Simpsons? Predictable, and yet, somehow, oddly satisfying. The USS Enterprise hovered above Earth, preparing to leave Springfield behind. Inside, the crew ran final diagnostics. Picard, standing at his command chair, exhaled deeply, looking relieved to be finally putting this bizarre mission behind them. "Mr. Data, are we absolutely certain there are no lingering anomalies?" he asked. Data scanned his console. Scans indicate that Springfield and its inhabitants have fully returned to their standard level of improbability. Riker smirked. "So, just as weird as before, but not dangerously weird?" Data tilted his head. "Correct." Picard straightened. "Then let's put this planet behind us. Mr. LaForge, prepare for warp." "Aye, sir," Geordi responded, keying in the final commands. For the first time in days, Picard finally relaxed. "Captain," Worf interrupted suddenly, "I am detecting an unauthorized transmission from the planet." Picard groaned, already bracing for the worst. "Let me guess." Worf scowled at his console. "It's Homer Simpson." Homer had somehow hijacked the Enterprise's communication system using nothing more than his TV remote. On the view screen, Picard's exasperated face flickered to life. "Hey, Captain Picardo, it's me again." Homer grinned. Picard pinched the bridge of his nose. "It's Picard." Yeah, listen," Homer continued. "Quick question. How much do I have to pay to take one of those beepy transporter things home with me?" In the background, Marge facepalmed. Picard's eyes widened. "Excuse me? Come on, beaming to work instead of driving? That's got to save at least $50 a month on gas," Homer reasoned. Picard took a slow, deep breath. "Mr. Simpson, after observing your actions, I can confidently say that giving you Starfleet technology would be a catastrophic mistake." Homer grinned mischievously. "What if I promise to only use it for work and definitely not sneak into a donut factory after hours?" Picard's expression flattened. "Goodbye, Mr. Simpson." The screen cut off. Homer pouted. "Hey, don't blame me. Blame whoever made that big shiny button so tempting." With a final command from Picard, the Enterprise powered up its warp engines and disappeared into the vastness of space, leaving Earth and Springfield behind. At the dinner table, Marge, Lisa, and Bart were already eating when Homer slumped into his chair, looking slightly dejected. "So, Dad," Bart smirked, "no Starfleet membership for you?" Homer crossed his arms. "Nope. Apparently I'm too unpredictable for space." Lisa chuckled. "That's the nicest way they could say it." Marge patted his hand reassuringly. "Homer, I think we can all agree. Maybe you belong here on Earth." Homer smirked. "Yeah, I guess space isn't ready for me yet." Marge nodded. Maggie suddenly let out a chirping beep, a sound exactly like a Starfleet communicator. The family froze. Maggie sat in her high chair, a blinking Starfleet badge in her tiny hand. Everyone gasped. Lisa's jaw dropped. "Dad, what did you do?" Homer raised his hands. "I didn't steal that. Probably." Before anyone could react, Maggie pressed the badge and vanished in a transporter beam. "My baby's gone to space!" Homer screamed, his hands pulling at his remaining hair. Everyone stared at the empty high chair, stunned. A tense silence. Then, Maggie suddenly reappeared, this time wearing a tiny Starfleet uniform, sucking on a mini communicator badge. Marge exhaled in relief. Lisa blinked in shock. Homer's mouth hung open, then curled into a proud smirk. "Okay," he admitted. "That was pretty cool." Picard finally sat in his ready room, savoring a long overdue cup of Earl Grey tea. The ship hummed peacefully. For once, things were quiet. Then, a communicator chirped on his desk. Picard hesitated. Slowly, he picked it up. "Hey, Captain Picardo." Homer's voice crackled over the line. "One last question. What's your policy on time travel?" "Asking for a friend." Picard closed his eyes, inhaling deeply through his nose. "Computer," he said at last, "mute all Springfield transmissions." The computer chimed in confirmation as Picard took a slow, silent sip of his tea. The end.